So when John gave this debate, he talked about the temple of truth. I'm not sure what he was referring to. I think maybe it's the idea that pathologists tend to have the ultimate say. I decided to play around with DALL-E, so I apologize for some of the surrealistic images in the presentation. But this is doctors at the temple of truth. How do you...
Oh, right there.
Oh,
yeah.
Got it. Okay. Oops. How do you go back? Okay. My conflicts of interest, and then some other disclosures. So I am a member, probably like a lot of people in the room, of just the IASLC, so I get JTO in the mail every month. But I'm not part of any working groups, the ILC. Another disclosure, I am working with Dr. Traub on the pan-tumor scoring system, who I'll be debating against. And I was requested to debate for the IASLC, although I do use it in my reports. So a lot of the IASLC guidelines are based on this Pater method from a paper in 2012. You basically take a tumor, you slice it up into different sections, and then you calculate the viable tumor, the amount of necrosis, and then also the tumor, just a stroma in the tissue. And then you add all of those different percentages, and then you get a percentage of each of these. And I'll show these later an example. So this led to the guidelines paper, where there's lots of different statements on how to submit a tumor, how to take pictures of it, how to do all these things, including the little picture here in the corner to do the calculations. So this is one of the tumors in the paper. So you take a map of the whole tumor. You take all these, you evaluate all of these different components in blocks of 10. And then if it's less than 10, you give single digits. And an NPR is defined, as we all know, as 10% of a viable tumor. This is in lung cancer. And then and when we actually look at the tumor, we submit a full cross-section of the tumor. This is just the IASLC guidelines. And if it's less than 3 centimeters, you submit the whole thing and look at the whole tumor resection bed. So this is an example. John likes this example. This is a 75-year-old chemo IO. This is the gross specimen. Looks like it has cheesy look to it. If you're a pathologist, when you see this, you think, well, this is probably necrosis. And a lot of it was. So we mapped it out, and I started submitting sections. And I looked at the tumor, and I'm like, I'm going to do an experiment and see how many of the, I'm going to submit the entire tumor bed and see how many sections this was. It's actually 50 sections. And a lot of it was necrosis. So 40% necrosis, sorry. There's a lot of fibrosis and stroma, and there's only 0.3%. So we had a major pathological response, but not even 1%. And out of that tissue, I was able to do NGS, and there's actually exon 14 skipping. And this was like a case that was kind of discussed at one of the earlier sessions. So similar kind of story, so MET skipping mutation. And then if the patient recurs, I don't know who oncologists will decide what to do. So there was a paper earlier this year about this whole thing. This is a lot of work, right? Each microscope slide, we have to do those 3 different assessments. And this paper looked at the different guidelines, and it looked at the final kind of take from their standpoint after they're doing their calculations is to submit, let me see if it's supposed to be bigger, is to submit an entire tumor bed up to a maximum of 20 sections. This is to get a 90% confidence in calling something MPR or PCR. If you don't have that many sections, the confidence actually decreases quite a bit. So some of the actual guidelines for IASLC and others can fall below this, and you may end up with a false negative PCR, MPR. It's a little bit scary. We want to keep things simple. Pathologists are busy people, believe it or not. We have trays of slides to look at. I run a thoracic pathology practice, but I also do GI pathology, so I have stacks and stacks of polyps, biopsies, other things to do. So I want to keep something simple. I need time to do these things. So having a simple system to go forward is ideal. If we compare the 2 methods, this is a paper looking at that. The left side A is the Pater method. Here. So this is the residual tumor is the total amount of tumor, viable tumor divided by tumor size. And then if you compare it to my colleague's formula, it's a very similar formula, except they add the regression bed. And if the regression bed is 0, then the IASLC actually comes out to the same, the immune response score. The other score, PCR is never going to change. PCR from one method to the other. It's just the other scores that are going to differ. And the calculations it seems trivial, but for a pathologist, it actually is difficult to classify different elements to call something a regression bed versus otherwise. This is an example of a neovascularized fibrosis. This is in the lymph node, and it's supposed to be associated with the immune response score, but actually this is a lymph node with a neoadjuvant chemotherapy only. There was no immunotherapy. So these things actually overlap. So it's hard to make sense of what's what, and the IASLC guidelines, it's just a simple approach to this question, and then just keep that in mind when some of the things in terms of pathology can be a bit challenging. It's another aspect too, is the tumor bed is a complex three-dimensional structure that we get, and piecing it together, going from a three-dimensional tumor bed to 2D pictures that are cut up in different microscope size can be challenging to measure. So this is just an example of a case that I had in an upper GI case. It was just neoadjuvant chemo, and I used Photoshop to take the slides and put them together, and then I highlighted what I thought was regression bed versus tumor, but this actually took some time. If there are tools available to make things simpler, like just computer-related tools, it would be much easier to make this, but a lot of this thing comes in the mind of pathologists, sometimes marking things with markers and putting it all together. It's actually quite challenging and time-consuming. So another question is reproducibility. Whether the IASLC method is reproducible. The group, the committee put together a reproducible, international reproducibility study. They took 11 pathologists worldwide, this side of the world, oops. And then they looked at the different slides. They shared it across the network, so it was all digital. They used this major pathological response form calculator. It's a little bit, they used a little bit of a different method. They used a weighted average rather than an average of each of the slides. So if one slide has more tumor or the other, it was balanced in that way. And the way they conducted it was to find out whether the method, the slide by slide, is comparable to the NPR. And it's actually pretty reproducible across the two. So the weighted average wasn't necessarily necessary, which is great because that makes things a lot simpler to measure. You just have to do your average on each slide and balance them out. So there's always interpathology variability. We talked about this reproducibility study, but there's always this reproducibility. This is a table from that paper, and oops, and all these different, the pathologists here were counting one thing, NPR, there was discordance, all these different aspects. The other thing too, the other method by Cottrell and Dr. Traub's group, there's either scoring method that's done, there's going to be a range between pathologists or people too. In another aspect too, when you actually apply these to real life, in research we have arbitration, right? So all cases with discordance were reviewed by other pathologists. This one too, a third pathologist had abjugated, I love that word, abjugated for the others, saying this is the ground truth. But in real life, it's us in our room, lots of slides waiting to look at, and then just who's arguing. Sometimes we can't find another pathologist to show slides, so we're just arguing with our microscope. And then finally, this other paper that came out last month in JTO was using artificial intelligence. So maybe that's the arbitrator. The ultimate arbitrator is using computer computers and artificial intelligence. And what's interesting is they applied the IASLC guidelines to neoadjuvant immunotherapy this time. They were able to use this system called PATHR that was trained to recognize tumor, stroma, and necrosis. And it takes minutes for this PATHR program to go through all the slides and annotate everything and give you a response, give you your scores. They used PATHR, and then they saw how well it was able to predict MPR. The ROC curve was showing a 0.98 concordance, and they also said how well PATHR was able to calculate MPR. What was interesting is that the humans had a trend to detect MPR, while the computer had a was significantly able to find the MPR cases. So, and the other thing that was interesting in the papers is the human MPR threshold wrong. The visual cutoff we use is 10%. If you take that group, the ones that had, so 20.6 had an MPR rate. If you take that same population and see where what the MPR rate the computer was giving, the MPR rate was actually 5.5. So that 10% is artificial and may be wrong. This is just an overview of Logan's work. So maybe it's just to illustrate the point that maybe we need to take a deeper look into the tissue. There's lots of information on the slide that we can tease out, and we were able to, I was fortunate enough to be part of this study, we were able to say from that little 1 millimeter punch, we could have a 95% prediction of how well a patient would do in a few years after the surgery. And the new model now is able to predict at 99% the prognosis of a stage 1A and stage 1B. So overall, the IASLC, at least these are my points for the IASLC, it's a universal, it's practical, you just need a pair of eyes and a spreadsheet. It's reproducible in international studies, it's simpler, maybe it's good enough, and it gives us, it's more in line with the busy pathologist practice. You can't spell IASLC without AI, maybe they'll like that. The model, and just the model with 3 variables, was able to predict MPR, albeit at 5.5% and not the 10% that we're calling. So there's, and just to quote you, there's so much more information in that $5 H&E that we can pull out. We're just looking at the tip of the iceberg. Just a few slides to leave you back. So this is sturgeons at their temple. So now they're going and use computers. It's Dr. Cools. Thank you, John. And then this is maybe the pathologist at their temple. In the future, that will be false gods, maybe. I don't know, but like at least I think we're just going into the tip of the iceberg, and maybe IASLC or even the immune response score, they have a lot more to develop. Thank you.